nowhere to be seen, the most powerful person in Iran, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, the ruler of Iran for the last 36 years. And tonight, there are major questions about his well-being and his whereabouts. Since Trump announced the ceasefire, we have not heard a single word from him. We've heard from Iran's president. We've heard from the foreign minister. We've heard from the head of the IRGC, as I just showed you. But we have not heard from the supreme leader. In fact, as of right now, as I'm talking, it has been more than 48 hours since his last post on social media, which was this image of an American flag going up in flames. And while our Fred Pleiken has seen people on the streets of Tehran, among the regime faithful, holding up pictures of the Ayatollah, this appears to be the last time that we've seen him on camera. That was back on June 18th, exactly 1 week ago. Since then, we know he's been in a bunker hiding. According to the New York Times, no longer using electronic communications, reportedly has a list of several successors in case he's killed. A source even telling me that the foreign minister was unable to get in touch with the supreme leader of the country during the ceasefire itself on whether to make a deal. I mean, this is incredible. This is the man who has been calling the shots for 36 years. And here we are at one of the most important moments, maybe the most important in those years. And he's nowhere to be seen. And there's been no one more vocal over those past decades when it comes to threatening the United States. He has led the Death to America chants. He's warned the United States would suffer irreparable damage, his words, should it enter the conflict between Iran and Israel, right? Leading the charge on this. He also threatened American bases. He's the one who warned that they are within Iran's reach. So his absence is glaring, and it comes at a crucial time. The ceasefire between Iran and Israel hanging on by a thread, holding tonight, mercifully, but still very fragile and new. Well, here's the president of Iran.
Can it start again? I guess someday it can. It could maybe start soon.
Of course, that's the president of the United States, although now I wonder what he would think of the misspeak I just had. Jeff Zeleny is out front live outside the White House. And Jeff, in that context, you hear Israel controlling the skies. President Trump saying that Iran, he almost doesn't worry about whether there's a nuclear deal or not because the damage that the U.S. inflicted in those strikes was so severe, right? He's made that very clear. But the absence of the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, is so crucial at this time to imagine the most important leader of a country being completely absent. What is the White House view on this?
Aaron, it's notable their view publicly, at least, is silence, and that speaks volumes, potentially. President Trump is making his way back here to the White House. He's scheduled to land this hour, and he has not said anything significantly, but behind the scenes, White House and administration officials also are not at least publicly talking about this, so it does raise questions. Now, you'll remember the whole reason that these discussions began with the U.S. and Iran a few months ago was because the supreme leader approved them. He signed off on them. And the question today that the U.S. president raised at the NATO press conference was Iran talks next week. Very few details about who will participate in those, if they will be at high levels or not, or what the outline of all that is. Even as President Trump is saying that, basically a gentleman's agreement is enough. They don't need any type of signed document about, limiting the future of the nuclear program. So it is a question. I do not have an answer for you on this. Administration officials do not seem to have an answer. So that perhaps is one of the most unknown parts of the intelligence reports that are still coming in here. So it's something certainly to keep an eye on. But for all sides essentially touting victory in this, the silence certainly is notable, Aaron.
All right, Jeff Zeleny, thank you so much. At the White House tonight, where, of course, the president's returned from the NATO summit. Out front now, Arash Azizi, an Iranian journalist who's deeply sourced in his home country, also a contributor at The Atlantic. Nazila Fadi, she was the New York Times correspondent based in Tehran for a decade. And Jim Sciutto, of course, our national security analyst. So, Arash, I know your sources have been telling you a lot about the supreme leader. In fact, some telling you that the Ayatollah's days could be numbered. What are you learning?
I'm learning that Tehran is really in the middle of a ferocious political struggle over the future of the country. This was already going on in lower form since Ayatollah Khamenei is 86. Who is going to take power after him, which direction the country is going to go in was already in the news. But I think he's really showed to be really inept as a wartime leader. As you were sort of pointing out before, this is a man who chanted death to America and death to Israel all his life. But when it came to direct confrontation with America and Israel, Iranian civilians did the dying. Iranian soldiers did the fighting, whereas he was fighting and he's nowhere to even be seen and not able to make the major decisions. So I think different figures who hope to take Iran into different directions are really plotting. And some of the people that I spoke to hope to, although they're not in touch with President Rouhani particularly, but they hope that someone like him and some other figures could take the reins and take Iran into a different direction.
I mean, Nazila, when you hear it, the president of Iran has spoken. The foreign minister, of course, seemed to lead the ceasefire, right? I mean, we know at least from reporting that the Ayatollah does not appear to have been part of that decision because he didn't have communications. The head of the IRGC has just spoken with new threats to the United States, and the Ayatollah said absolutely nothing. What do you make of it?
It is really hard to speculate what's happening. I mean, he clearly is absent from the picture. He either doesn't know what has happened, he is unaware of the scale of the conflict and the number of people who have lost their lives, and also his own military leaders who have been completely eliminated. He either doesn't know, or I think I saw something positive right before the ceasefire, and that might demonstrate that there is some kind of measured approach going on, and there is some kind of leadership emerging, because Iran did show restraint. Iran was the first country that acknowledged the ceasefire, and we are seeing that they are trying to de-escalate the crisis. I totally agree with Arash. This is the time that change is going to come, and there is not much love or support for the supreme leader. So maybe his absence is not being felt so much inside the country. He is the one whose reckless language caused the crisis, and also he's the man who has basically crushed any kind of dissent and any kind of reform that started from 1997 in the country.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Jim, it is just truly spectacular to consider, right, that someone could lead a country for decades in this direction, right, and then at the moment of crisis, when ceasefire and such humiliation is nowhere to be seen. I know you just spoke with the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations a few moments ago. You asked him about the Ayatollah. Does Israel have any idea where he is?
That's right. I spoke to Ambassador Danny Danon. When I first asked him, he said, well, that's really a question for the Iranians. But I pressed him and I said, do you have knowledge? And specifically, did Israel attempt to strike the supreme leader? Because as you mentioned, Aaron, Israel has taken out a number of senior military officials, nuclear experts, etc. Danon's answer, and I'm going to read it to be clear, he said, no, we know he's very old. We know he was hiding in a bunker for a while, but we don't know what's happening with him today. So the ambassador saying Israel did not attempt to strike him. I think a simple explanation is possible, and that it is a very nervous situation today for senior leaders in Iran, given how many have been killed in recent days by Israeli strikes, and it may very well be that he's continuing to take cover, right, and that using an electronic device in the midst of that is a dangerous thing to do.
Right. Of course, we don't know who runs his social media account, given his age and who he is. It would appear someone else posts things, but that hasn't been happening, right? That burning flag before the ceasefire, the last acknowledgement, Arash, does it appear, and this is the crucial question, when you talk about regime change, those words that President Trump put into the ether last week and now says, the U.S. doesn't want regime change, or that's not what they're seeking. Do you think that the Ayatollah is actually still in charge?
I don't think so. I think there are many signs in which he's not making the day-to-day decisions, and there are others who have stepped, into the spotlight there. To do that, the National Security Council, for example, was the body that decided on the ceasefire, and that was clear. I should also say that in the last little while, I've spoken to someone. I reported about this in the Atlantic, of a number of people, military figures, businessmen, some of them political figures, who are having conversations. They were obviously very hesitant to talk to anyone, but they spoke to me in the hope of putting this out to the world so that they'll see what are the reactions. And they're thinking, they put it as sort of a plan for post-Khamenei Iran. Now, whether that's when Khamenei dies, if that's soon, or whether they can sideline him perhaps they can put him on the house arrest, they can sort of temporarily keep him as a figurehead, but, as it is now, effectively let the decisions pass elsewhere. And these are figures to have hopes for someone like Rouhani. And, they have some interesting characteristics, but very much they very much would like Iran to have better relations with the region. Some of them are in touch with the GCC countries, with which Iran has had developing relations. So I very much think that, and they also believe that they're not the only plot in town, that there are other plots going on in Tehran in this regard. So I very much think that this is a moment when it's possible that one of these will win and will able to push Iran into a different direction.